Hi there, Feelings Pod fans. This is your host, Jordan Gruciola, letting you know that the episode you're about to listen to is from the Wayback Playback Machine, one of our very first conversations of the show with the tremendous actress Isabelle Fuhrman. At that time, she had the Independent Spirit-nominated film The Novice coming out, which you all better have watched by now. And since we talked, she has had the transcendently bonkers and delightful Orphan First Kill, and now she has the new movie Sheroes playing, where you can access that on many video on-demand channels. And as always, we've got a one quick thing at the tail end, and this time it's about Scream 5? I stand by everything that I said, so let's get to the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies that make us feel seen. In this episode, my co-host for the day will be actor Isabelle Fuhrman. She is going to talk with me about her newest movie, The Novice, and the ways in which she relates to that character and the ways in which we all sort of relate to the screen via performance. We're going to switch it up. It's going to be a little bit different than conversations we've had previously, but you know what that means? That just means you're in for some new treasures and adventures, so lucky you. And then before we go at the end of the day, we are going to talk a little bit about a topic near and dear to my heart, which is the new Scream coming out, and specifically the matter of Sidney Prescott. So don't go anywhere. I've got a lot of emotion behind that. And now, without any further delay, let me give that co-host a proper introduction. Isabelle Fuhrman is an actor who you may know from the deeply underrated 2009 horror film The Orphan, in which she gives a gangbusters performance as the titular character. She also played Clove in the mega franchise The Hunger Games. But the thing you can do right now, the place and time you can see her, is right now in the movie The Novice. Tremendous drama that is so good it's been nominated for multiple Independent Spirit Awards, which includes Isabelle's nomination for Best Female Lead. Isabelle, is there anything else we need to know about you before we get started?
Other than that, I love dogs and it's a rainy day, but it feels like a really great day at the same time. I'm good. Yeah, ready to go.
Great start. I feel like it's like I don't want to bring it up, but I feel like if I don't bring it up, I would be remiss because you might, I'm sure it gets brought up to you all the time. We have to recognize at the top of this that Isabelle turned in one of the great genre performances of all time as a child in Orphan. Truly, I rewatched this movie recently. The amount of screaming and delight that me and the entire room of people shared with one another at watching your performance, a performance which we had seen, a performance which we knew. Your range at 10 and your ability in this movie and back when you were a child to play a character with a huge secret and to unfold that so delicately over the course of a film is incredible. Isabelle, the range from 10 to present. It's unbelievable.
Thank you. No, it definitely terrifies my family. It's so funny because my mom, I remember when she watched Orphan and still to this day, when she watched Novice, she's like, I know you. I love you. You're my daughter. I've known you every single day of your entire life. And yet I watch your movies and I'm like, where is my daughter? Because that's her body and that's her face, but it's not her. But that's, for me, that's the point,
Right. I feel like if I were mom, I'd be looking at you being like, you could be hiding anything from me. And yeah, so I did read it in an interview that you had done that you really kind of wanted to lead by example in the filming of this movie, which is I was watching it last night. I was wanting to wait to watch it fresh before going into the conversation. And I was like, I tweeted about it near the very, I was like, there are 8 minutes left in this movie. And I feel like my body is going to explode into fire. The finale was just eating away at me. And then I read about how you were but I wanted to make sure on set when we were filming that I was keeping the tempo good on set, that I was keeping the spirits high. And it's I'm going to lead from the front on this one because we're dealing with a lot of heavy shit here in The Novice.
Yeah, no, I've been really lucky to work with such great actors since I was really young. And when I did Orphan, especially, Vera Farmiga and Peter Sarsgaard, in my mind, are two actors that you like, not everybody knows who they are, but everybody in the industry obviously does. And working with them on my first film really set a bar because they held the set in such a wonderful space of respect and love and positivity. And I realized, after that, working on other projects, you're not always as lucky to work with people that hold the set like that. And when you're the number one person on the call sheet and you're in every single frame of the movie and you're spending the majority of the time on set with the crew, if you're having a bad time and showing it, everybody else is having a bad time. So I really, I knew going into it how big of a feat this movie was going to be, especially because we were such a small budget independent film. And, we had such a strong story that Lauren had written. We had a clear vision from her. Everybody was on board, but I knew that if I couldn't emotionally separate, when the camera was rolling and being Alex to being smiley, happy Isabelle, that things might go downhill pretty quickly because the crew morale is so important in making a movie. And I think because I was able to smile even when we were in pouring rain and I was peeing off the side of a boat after being in the water for 10 hours, when everything was going wrong, I just remember, because I had a walkie-talkie when I was in those boats, I remember I would just hear like, well, Isabelle looks like she's having a good time. So like, let's just keep and that to me is great, because I think that is what drove us through this movie from beginning to end. I mean, we really, as much as this was at times like a struggle to make this film, I had the most incredible time. I still feel like I'm that girl from American Pie, and I'm just like, this one time at band camp, like I literally can't stop talking about this movie. I feel so bad for the two films that I worked on after this, because I think every sentence was like, well, when I was doing this road,
everyone's like, we don't want to hear about your ex anymore, Isabelle. We don't want to hear about it.
And I was just like, I just was so in love with this film and this whole process, and like how much I got into it. I mean, I really felt like I lost myself for a bit, but had the best time at the same time. So creatively fulfilled.
Well, and okay, so a thing I did want to talk to you about, like, obviously you've been asked a lot about the training that went into this and the extensive training in rowing that you did and the many hours. What I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more broadly was thinking between sort of this role at the present and then the role at the very start. An elemental thing to both was transformation. And I wanted to hear about sort of, for you as a performer, the element of physical transformation and how that works in conversation with like the emotional, intellectual way of getting into character, preparing for a character. Like, what role does physical transformation play when you're in an intense kind of film like this?
I think it's massive. I think I've always looked up to actors like Daniel Day-Lewis and Christian Bale. And I mean, obviously Meryl Streep, because those are actors that every time you see them in a film, you don't see the person, you see the character. And I have always been fascinated by that, how you can completely lose yourself in somebody else, step into their skin, breathe the air that they're breathing, live in the world that they're living in, and fully embody what they're going through. And for me, I've always found that the physicality of the characters I play is where I find them. And I've done this, actually since Orphan. I purposefully try and change the intonation of my voice or the way that I speak, the way that I walk, or habits that I have. Like for Alex, for example, like I bit my nails like crazy because I wanted to look like, even when I looked like I was put together, it's like these like nubby, tiny little fingernails.
I will not lie. The first thing that made me like squirm out of my chair when I was watching this, like where I was like, oh no, we're in hell, is when you started biting your nails at the very beginning of the movie. I was like, I know this person suddenly entirely. This is telling me everything I need to know, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified for the trip she's about to go on.
Yeah, and those are things that are little things that you do, and then obviously they start to add up, and you end up creating this physicality for this character. And obviously you're working on the script simultaneously. So this movie, rowing for 6 hours every single day, I found Alex on the water. Like I found relationships between what I was physically going through with the same things that she goes through in the script. Feeling like this novice, feeling out of place, feeling like you're constantly striving to be better, feeling like you're trying to push yourself so that way you don't look like an idiot in front of all these other people that are in the boat with you. And it really put me in a similar mind frame that I found so many rich moments that I was able to put into my performance. And then on top of it, like, then you work on the script and all of that. And that transformation kind of goes hand in hand. And you find ways to blend the two together. Like you said, finding those moments where, she's in the back of the car listening to this conversation, but she is biting her nails. She is in this place where like, where something physical is what is telling the story. And I always feel like, great actors can move their eyes and say absolutely nothing at all. And you can see exactly what they're saying. And I was really fortunate that Lauren trusted me to tell the story because like for the first 12 minutes, I don't even speak.
Right. Yeah, true.
And even like my transformation as an actor from the beginning to the end of my training, from the end of filming, I gained 12 pounds of muscle, and that changed drastically the way that I stood, the way that I carried myself, the way that I walked. And that was something that I was able to put into my performance as well. So I think that they go hand in hand. I think that's why Christian Bale, like, loses 75 pounds and eats like a cracker a day or to transform himself for a role. I
think he went from the Machinist maybe straight to Batman.
Yeah, because what you do in that journey is you find this person. I think when you alter your body, you change your personality. I think any girl will know, you have a breakup, you cut your hair and you're like, I'm a whole new woman, It's like, no, you're not.
Revenge body, hashtag.
Like it changes your perception of yourself. And so I always try and do that. I always try and really change my perception of myself with my, whether it's like an external physical appearance or a mannerism or a way that I walk or a way that I speak. And that way it allows me to kind of slide into this character. And it also gives me a pretty easy escape route to Isabelle when I need to find myself in moments where I feel like I've lost myself on set.
That's okay. So that is a very, because while you've been talking about this and a little bit what we discussed about before we started recording was I remembered around the time of Girl Interrupted, Angelina Jolie was in like a particular kind of zenith of her fame, obviously her Academy Award role. And she talked about, that was a time when she was a bit more of like an erratic public figure and, the blood vial around the neck. And that was very much a part of the persona.
Yeah.
And she talked about at that time, speaking in terms of like Girl Interrupted, a movie like Gia, at that point, her relationship with her art was at the end of filming, she would find that she would go into these very dark recesses because she would essentially be like cutting out a part of herself and walking away from it. And she would go through this intense period of like grief, of grieving for the person she had left behind. And we had talked a bit before about you watching movies sort of in the context, like you as a viewer, your sort of instinctual relationship with these performances, with these actors you really love, is to not necessarily see parts of yourself so much as to completely lose, yourself in the performance that they are giving. Sort of like, how do I put myself in this world with them?
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk a bit about that with like, coming through the Novice and perhaps your other work too. Like, how do you find your emotional relationship is sort of after these intense roles? Like, have you always been able to find Isabelle and find that escape hatch, or is that something you've had to learn how to do?
After I did Orphan when I was younger, I felt like I carried that character with me for a really long time. Not like, the crazy running around, killing people part, but
you weren't trying to break up marriages as a 10 or 11-year-old.
No, but I felt really old. I felt so old. I felt like I was an adult. And it doesn't, I don't think that this business forces people to grow up fast. I think that that's like, it can happen. But I think that I was working around adults all the time. So you learn to grow up fast because you learn that if you want an opinion, you have to state it confidently, like an adult. You can't go, well, I kind of want to maybe you have to say, I want this character to do this, or I feel that this scene is better done like this. And if you don't say it confidently, then no one's going to trust you. Especially as a kid. And I think after finishing that movie, it was tough. I remember like it took me a while to kind of come back to Isabelle and it was for a while, I would say, I would crash after working on films. I would get really sick and like tired and I would just expend all of my energy. And what's funny is I really started to focus, I would say, once I turned 21, I spent a year where I didn't work actually for the year that I was 21. And I just had a good time. I hung out with my friends.
Good. Yeah. I love that for you. I'm really glad you did that.
I had a good time with my friends. I ran a marathon. I made good friends. I like loved kind of learning who I was. And I really felt like it was a great time for me to connect with myself at that age. And, I realized that taking time for myself was so important, kind of like, taking time to be single. I mean, I always compare like these characters you play to like these relationships, like they're
Completely.
really close relationships.
Yeah.
And so I took time to be single when I was 21, and then, came back. And when I did Novice in 2019, I mean, that was at the end of the year, I really felt like I was in a place where I was prepared for it, where I mentally knew that I could separate the two, that I could play this character and be Isabelle, and I could change myself completely. I mean, that's why I wouldn't say that I'm a method actor per se. I don't think I would subscribe to any specific kind of like technique, but I do tons of preparation, and I definitely like lose myself while I'm working on something, but only with enough room to find myself when I really need to. And I take the time that I need. I mean, like when I'm on set, I'm 100% there. I'm smiling, joking, having a great time. They call action. I'm like in the moment, in the scene, living and breathing this character. And then whenever there's a break, like I am finding time to be alone. So I could be checking in with myself, taking a nap if I need, doing the self-care that I need in order to give this performance, in order to give to the crew, and in order to give something to myself, basically, to myself. So I get what Angelina Jolie is saying about having those recesses. I think that those dips do happen. I think I've been trying to mediate them, and I did in the past with running. That was kind of what I did. If I didn't have a film next, I would run. I would train for a race, and I would do a race. And this last year, I kind of decided that, that's not healthy either. It's good. It's really good to be in a place where there is this possibility of not knowing what's next. And that's a really powerful place to be. And I think, this movie has a lot of this hustle culture attached to it, which I think we have.
Yeah.
And I definitely have that as a person, like, that kind of like Alex doesn't come from anything outside of myself. So I've learned through this film, through playing this character, this big, massive lesson in my life, which is you don't always have to have a next. And I think that's what, where instead of a crash now, I feel like I go, what did I learn from this? And what am I going to take moving forward as I say goodbye to this person?
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer. I really appreciate that. Well, I'm really glad, I'm really glad you mentioned the hustle culture aspect, because that was, I was, reading through interviews in advance of talking to you. And there was, I think one of my favorite things you've talked about was, I think it was the Roger Ebert interview. And you talked about how really almost nothing is as it seems. Like this is, this movie is, it's toying with perceptions, and life is a game of perceptions. And that was true before the advent of social media, let alone the age of image management that we're sort of in now. But you spoke about, then I think you said it was the night before the Indie Spirit noms came out in the morning. Yeah. You were like, I was at a gas station and my card's getting declined and I can't fill my tank. And I'm sitting there crying, being like, I hope tomorrow morning goes well, because I need to figure something out. And I will not lie to you, as somebody whose sister had to just work something out with the family dentist to help get me the dental care I can't currently afford, I was like, fucking thank you for saying that.
But it's true. I've been in this business since I was really little. And it's funny because I have people that I knew when I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, who think that I'm living in a multi-million-dollar house in LA. Yeah. And I live in an apartment with my mom. My grandma's currently living with me on my couch because we're trying to find a place for her to live here, because she's been living in Wisconsin and it's been too far away. And especially last year, we wanted to bring her closer.
And she shouldn't be going through those winters. She shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, she keeps asking me if it's going to snow here in LA. And I think she's pointed that it's not. But
you're like, well, we're going to hell if it does. Yeah. So hopefully not, Grandma.
But working in the film industry is not unless you're Will Smith, who I've worked with, and he's a wonderful guy. You're not making millions of dollars on every movie that you do. You're making, and also the work is sporadic. So maybe you get a good little boost from a film that you do and someone pays you good, but you're living off that the entire year. And I was lucky enough that I was able to make the prequel to Orphan during 2020. But I didn't work at all this 2021 at all. I mean, Lauren and I talk about it. It's like, everyone's like, the success of your movie, it's incredible. And like, we're a tiny independent movie. Like, this is so unbelievably exciting that we're here and people are talking about us for awards and that we're getting nominated for Independent Spirit Awards and that we won Tribeca. But when we made this movie, it was not this big budget affair. Like, this movie was less than $2 million budget. Like, nobody really got paid in massive amounts. I mean, the only reason Lauren edited the movie is because we didn't have the money for post-production. Like
Wow.
that's how most of these decisions get made. And it's funny, people look at it as this glamorous, incredible business. And it is. I mean, my sister and I were laughing because she's like, everyone thinks that, you're just like raking it in right now, Isabelle. And I'm like, I know, because it's hilarious, because I have like luck. I'm very fortunate that like Louis Vuitton sends me a purse as a present. What a lovely gift. But like, I couldn't buy it for myself right now, but I'm so grateful to have it. But it is funny for like the perception versus the reality,
I feel like that exists sort of integrally to the conversations I try to have on this particular podcast, because, in part of identifying ourselves in movies, it is this balance between who do we see on screen that represents the person that we want to be versus who, perhaps in the same character, perhaps in a different character, who represents the things that we are, but we maybe don't acknowledge, or maybe we don't want to acknowledge. Like when we see a truth reflected back at us, that can be a very painful thing for some people. It can be very euphoric for others. And it can, of course, be a balance between the two. But I think that is we're all sort of subject to that same needing to find the truth in the middle of the perception of ourselves, the way we want to be perceived, and then the truth beneath all of it. And what you do in this movie, considered, I think in the context of things that you've said, talking about it, like that wonderful answer you just gave, I think there is I really like thinking of this movie and your role as sort of blending all of those considerations into one thing. Because we're seeing Alex as she is, we're seeing Alex as she wishes to be perceived, and then we're seeing the way that Alex is perceived by others. And like you have said, this movie exists within her mind. So it's an incredible blend of all of these things.
I always think about that when I dive into a character, is like, what's the, who is this person in private? Who is this person, the people closest to them? And who is this person publicly?
Yeah.
The way that other people perceive that character and the way that the audience perceives that character, that's totally up to Lauren. And I think that's the same with people. Like, you can't control how somebody looks at you and what they think of you. Like, I didn't have to say to myself, Alex is psychotic. Lauren was going to make Alex look psychotic. I didn't need to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that was not a part of my journey in this character, And I don't think that Alex is 100% honest with herself either. And that is, I think, very true for most people. I mean, and even, saying like being seen by a character, when I read the script, I didn't know what it was that pulled me into it, that captivated me. I mean, I always look for movies that have present a challenge, or will always, make me think about something, or bring me into the world of somebody else, and that will completely allow me to transform. And this movie did all of those things. But at the same time, through this character, I felt like I was seeing a part of myself, and really only saw it until when I watched it on screen. I wouldn't say I realized this while I was working on the project and while I was living with her every single day. But when I watched the movie the first time, I felt in my gut like, oh shit, you spent this movie playing with this like shadow part of your personality that you never really like to talk about, that you never really like to present to people. And that, quite honestly, I try and hide, because I live in LA and everybody has this like, oh, I don't care. Like, I wake up in the morning, I'm super chill. Like, everything.
No, that is super real. I have a friend here who was once employed for 8 months and didn't tell a single person, because he didn't want anybody to know he needed a job, because he was afraid that would disqualify him for jobs, that people knew he needed one.
It is a strange place. I don't know if it's the same everywhere else, but it's something that really confuses me about LA, is like, everybody feels really good being in this place of like, oh, well, I don't really try very hard, or like, I'm just like kind of working on this thing. And like, I'm
just working on this thing.
Yeah. Everyone's kind of like, and I think it's a West Coast mentality, because I always find it interesting when I go to New York, and people there, they will always tell you about what they're working on and how it's going. And I think that there's like a really great happy medium that can be had, where you can have that kind of work ethic. And it's more like people in New York don't talk about it. They're working like crazy, and they're always exhausted, and they want to talk about everything else. People in LA always like to talk about work, but no one's actually doing anything. And that's what I think is interesting about like Alex, is she so much is, it's an East Coast school, but she has this mentality of like, I am working hard. I'm going to isolate myself. I'm going to like, wake up early. I'm going to stay late. I'm going to really like crush this thing that is I'm not naturally predisposed to do, and I'm going to face this challenge and I'm going to succeed. And she's like staring at Jamie across the room, who's like, oh, I wasn't really trying that hard, so I don't think the time that the coach recommended is accurate.
Yeah.
And it's like someone literally stabbing her in the chest, because for her, it's like, that seems like next to impossible. So it really, it is a part of myself that I wasn't really particularly comfortable with. And sharing it through this movie has made me realize that I am this person. I think I'm having a better relationship with this part of myself, but I don't necessarily think I want to throw this part of myself away, because I think it gives me an edge. It's what's allowed me to stay in this business since I was 10, through all the ups and downs, through going to school, through everything, was really knowing that I have a resiliency that I don't think everybody has.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, but we have got so much more to get into with Isabelle Fuhrman. Stay with us.
What is up, people of the world? Do you have an argument that you keep having with your friends and you just can't seem to settle it? And you're sitting there arguing about whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars, or you can't decide what is the best nut, or can't agree on what is the best cheese?
Stop doing that. Listen to We Got This with Mark and Hal, only on Max Fun.
Your topics asked and answered objectively, definitively, for all time.
So don't worry, everybody. We got this.
We got this.
They can be anywhere, at your office, in your car, and they are wrong.
My mom says that the Grey House didn't exist, but she's wrong.
He just does it wrong.
Someone in your life is wrong about something. Something small, something weird, something vitally important. Only one person has the courage to tell them just how wrong they are.
You know what you did was wrong, but your daughter is a liar who eats garbage.
They call me Judge John Hodgman. Listen to me on the Judge John Hodgman podcast.
If someone in your life is doing you wrong, don't just take it to court. Submit your case at MaximumFun.org/JJHO.
Welcome back to Feeling Seen. I'm your host, Jordan Crucchiola. I'm talking with Isabelle Fuhrman this week. She's the star of the new movie, The Novice. It's a role that has earned her an Independent Spirit Award nomination, and I would assume some battle scars along the way with the physical grit and determination she throws into this part. You might have also seen Isabelle in The Hunger Games or The Orphan, where she played the character of Esther. Look her up, watch the movie, experience it for yourself. Let's get back into it. We're all forced to confront aspects of ourselves that we might not yet have reconciled, but in your doing so, you have to live them. You have to sleep with them, you have to talk to them, you have to embody them. And that is in doing so, you become a conduit for us to like face those evils perhaps in ourselves or those demons we haven't dealt with. It's a very unique job you have.
Well, when I studied psychology in school, one of my favorite things that we talked about in class one day was you tell a kid that the stove is hot and they can't touch the stove because they'll burn themselves. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, that kid will touch the stove and see for himself or herself whether it's hot. But if you tell the kid a story about how this kid across the street was at his house and the stove was on and it was burning and didn't listen to his parents and he touched it and his skin almost melted off, and you get really into the details of it, that kid will never touch the stove because they're going to have an emotional reaction to the story that you tell them. And so storytelling is really special in this way that it allows people to learn things through an emotional response that it gets ingrained in their brain, in their body, and everything just by observing and watching a movie. Now, not all movies do this. I mean, some movies, you just like, having like a wonderful escape from reality, or you're laughing about something, or you're going, oh, I wish I could go on vacation with my friends like that. But in a movie like this, for example, like that's what this movie is in a sense. It's a way for you to like dive into someone's head and understand the anxiety inducing journey it is to become obsessed with something and to try to be the best at it for no other reason other than to prove it to yourself. And I learn a lot through characters that I play. And I also learn a lot about myself. I also feel so much. I mean, I'm a Pisces. I'm a very emotional person, and when I have these moments with these characters where, like, for example, that scene in Novice where I have this argument with Danny in the bathroom, I mean, that scene felt incredibly real to me in so many ways. Everything from the whole speech of like, nobody knows how hard I have to push myself to be the best. I mean, that felt so real when I was saying it. And Delone really like brought such a new spin on the scene, in the sense that she started grabbing at my shirt, and that was not in the script. And all of a sudden we were on the floor, and then we were crying, and then we were talking about stuff that not everything made the cut. But the way that I see that scene now is so different than how I imagined it reading it, was because our feelings took us somewhere else. And that scene ended with like Delone and I on the ground hugging each other for like 5 minutes while Lauren sat on the other side of the door, and Todd's like there with the camera, and I hear Todd crying, and Delone and I are crying, and then I just hear Lauren from the other room just go, cut, and she comes we all just like collapsed on the floor and cried together for like 10 minutes because what we had done was we lived through a real experience that felt so real, that like all of us, like our DP Todd had just gone through a breakup too. Like Lauren had gone through a breakup. Todd, had gone through a breakup. I mean, I hadn't just gone through a breakup, but still it felt like I went through a breakup. You know,
right?
So,
but you don't have to have gone through the breakup. You're the subject.
No,
you're the subject of the scene.
I went through a breakup, and it was so sad. And that's what you see in the movie. And to me, it I'm so proud of that moment, because what we captured was not like a prepared, you know, scene where we prepped for it and got ready for it. I mean, of course we did, but what we found was something so much richer. Like I had an acting teacher when I was younger, when I went to RADA in London, who said, no one wants a cooked meal. You want to cook it in front of them to show everybody what it looks like, so they can smell it, so they want to taste it, so they can salivate over it. And that's what we had done, is we had literally we had chopped all that shit and put it in the pan, and we made it in front of everyone. And then it was like, everyone's crying, eating it, going, this is the best thing ever. And we all knew, like, yeah, it is the best thing ever, because we found something real.
Now, okay, then I'm curious too, like we talked about sort of those, like, to create those like emotionally evocative moments. I wonder if there are some like representative or standout scenes that you've observed in other work, where you feel like you just watched them making the meal in front of you. Like some scenes where you were like, that's the fucking cooks in the kitchen right there. And like, that's the craft I want to get to.
A scene that I watched last night. I mean, I love Devil Wears Prada because Meryl Streep's performance.
Fabulous.
But it's so specific. And that scene where she starts talking about how she's laughing about the belts being the same. Because she's wearing the sweater that she thinks has enough.
Oh, the blue sweater, the cerulean blue sweater.
Both those belts look exactly the same to me. You know, I'm still learning about this stuff, and
This stuff? Oh, okay. I see. You think this has nothing to do with you. You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns, and then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets? I think we need a jacket here. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Every single beat has its own moment, its own meal. Every sentence just like cuts deeper and deeper and deeper. And she knows it, but she's not alluding to it. She's not showing it. It's like stabbing someone in the stomach without them knowing. And it's not until it's over that you realize that you're dying. Like, that's how clever.
Oh my God, I'm bleeding out. How did this happen?
Yeah, that's how clever that scene is. That performance in that scene is really, in my mind, such a it's a difficult thing to pull off, honestly, because you could just say it's like the dialogue, but she's not just saying the dialogue. She's putting together the outfit. She's moving around the room. She is embodying this other person. She is this character. So that's like a scene that I would say really floored me recently, but that's just because I watched that movie the other day. I mean, I think I watched Red Rocket too recently, and that scene where Susanna Sun plays the piano for Simon Rex's character in the bedroom, and you're like, wow, don't go with him to LA. Like that was, you know what I mean? You're like,
every fiber in your body is screaming, do not go.
But that to me is like those scenes like in movies that really make you go like, oh, like, gosh, you just want to like kick something or do something. I mean, I really love when I watch films and they take me someplace else, or when you watch an actor and you can't quite figure out how they're doing it because they're not doing anything. They just are.
Well, I think a thing that I kept sort of going back to as I was watching the movie was, and we've touched on this a bit up to this point, but the way Alex as a character very comfortably demystifies the notion of effortlessness. She's not secret about how hard she works, but she's also not the one walking into the room being like, I'm working the hardest. Like, it has to be kind of contextually like elicited out of her, but she will fully say, like in that wonderful, like extremely cute pool scene between Alex and Danny, where you're talking about exactly how you became salutatorian of your cast and all the times that it didn't work. Like the guy who just never tried. And I love that banter back and forth of her being like, and then you beat him. And you're like, no, not yet. And then you beat him. Okay, no, but not that time. You tied. Like, I really, because there's something very radical still about women asserting how, I mean, and Alex has some boundary issues and she needs to work out some coping mechanisms. But there is something very radical about women expressing how hard they work. Because it is very an LA specific thing to be like, oh no, it's chill. Work just comes to me and I've got stuff going on. I can't talk about it yet. I'll tell you soon. Like that is a very LA move. But like the idea of like women having to be twice as good and look like they're working half as hard so as not to be confrontationally ambitious or to not be offensively trying hard. Like, you know, the try hard, which even gets shouted out in this movie. Like, Jamie's character mentions like, oh, the tryhard, she's gone.
Yeah.
Like that's something we don't want. And I really liked how even as we are battling with how to root for Alex versus rooting for Alex to stop, I never stopped rooting for that Alex was the hardest worker and wanting that to have a return on its investment. And I thought it was really incredible how this movie emphasized the work. And then in that last moment, how we see it go, the outcome is never what we were there for because it's about the work.
We as people, I feel generally and genuinely have this desire to be rewarded for any work that we do. And I see this more and more. It's like you work for a certain amount of time. You're like, I feel like I should be paid more. I feel like this should happen. I feel like I should be promoted. I mean, it's a natural part of the work is this kind of like looming outcome that could possibly happen. And Lauren and I spoke a lot about how in this movie, there is no external force that's like pushing her forward. This is not the crew team that's going to go to the Olympics. This is not, that's not what this is. This is more of a challenge to see if Alex can win out against these naturally gifted people and prove that even though she's not tall enough or isn't predisposed to be doing this sport is not what you would think of when you look at a rower. That she can beat all of them with her resilience and with her grit and with her drive. And it's not to beat them. It's really to prove to herself that she can. I love this movie. And Lauren and I spoke about this a lot too in recent interviews, how, she wrote this about her own kind of experience in collegiate rowing. And so to me and to her, gender didn't really seem to be something that we spoke about very often in the context of this movie. It's just like, that was, write what you know, right? So she wrote a story that she knew. And, that's why this movie is like, a lot of people have asked us so many questions about like how feminist this film is and how like women oriented it is. And what I love about Lauren is she's like, well, yeah, because it's like what I wrote. Like, that's just what I knew.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I'm going to write this movie about women's rowing. It was like, this was my experience. And here it is. So I find the competitive nature of it actually fascinating too, in the context of the women on the team, because they all seem to have their own axe to grind, you know?
Yeah.
Amy is like vying for that scholarship. Charlotte Ubben's character, who plays the coxswain, she is like wanting to be in that varsity boat, but she's not going to fight to do it. She's not going to like kick and scream. She thinks it'll happen in the right time. You know, Coach Edwards is like trying to make her team better and is trying to inject some of the work ethic that Alex has into her naturally gifted team that she scouted from all over the country. And no one's really stepping up to the plate except for this like novice who she doesn't particularly think has that much talent and thinks is kind of crazy.
Well, okay. So a thing that as we wind down, like one of the last things I wanted to ask you was like, since you brought up like, and I'm really glad you mentioned this. You mentioned how like, you tell me about this feminist rowing movie that you've made. And it's like, actually, I just made a movie about that I like understood because it came from my life. Mm-hmm. And what I think is really noteworthy about that is that I'm 100% with you guys on that answer. And that is why it's one of the things that I was really enjoying most about this movie is that reminder that we are progressing to a point in the opportunities women, genderqueer, non male normative individuals are getting a chance to make their movies and tell their stories. And how that means that because there can be more opportunities like that, every opportunity doesn't feel like the last one or the only one. And so this can just be a movie about a queer girl who's like, want to go out sometime, and there doesn't have to be an event over the fact that she just asked a girl out, even though she was hooking up with the dude in the beginning of the movie. And this can just be about a bunch of women who row without being a bunch of capital W women who row. And it's really nice for there to be representation that doesn't have to feel like capital R representation when you are watching something and feeling it resonate with you and being like, this is so great. It's just being presented to me as a story, not some like obelisk that I'm meant to rally around because I check the box of women and I check the box of queer.
Yeah, Lauren really has spoken to this, I think, way better than I could. But she's said, and when we talked about it too, originally after I read the script, the reason Danny and her relationship with Danny is a queer relationship was simply based on the fact that Lauren is a queer woman. And she actually, funny enough, the reason Danny is because she originally wrote, because this like, heteronormativity wrote Danny as a dude. And when she first read the script through, she was like, this makes no sense. Like, I'm just going to change a bunch of things and change Danny to being a woman, because she was like, I didn't want to write that story. And I love
props to you for having Delone as a screen girlfriend.
Oh, I know.
Round of applause for you.
When they cast her, I was so red, because I remember Lauren came to my trailer and I was like, you think that like I could date her? I was like so flattered and shocked. But when I read the script, I found that to be so groundbreaking, because I think there's so much right now being written, and I understand there is a need for representation. But I also think that the way to make representation really, like we talked about storytelling, right? And how you can learn from storytelling. If you show a relationship like this, where the relationship that Alex has with a woman is not something that the team harps on, there's no slurs, there's no anything, it's just something that is a part of the story. You normalize it in a way that people don't question it. It's not like, oh, well, why did they have to, have her date a woman? It's like, it doesn't matter, because it's not even a conversation. It's
not even a conversation point.
The fact of the movie. And that was something I really loved. I feel like is so groundbreaking. And Lauren has said this over and over, that like, obviously there is importance in having stories being told about queer oppression and moments in history. And also, to really show the differences of the time period. But she feels, and I feel too, as we've been moving forward in our, in society and in this next generation too, people are just way more fluid about it, way more chill about it. It doesn't really become a conversation. It's like, people are all people. People love who they love. People fall in love with who they want to fall in love with. And we don't necessarily need to have these like labels, all the time of what this is and what that is and how to explain it or box it up.
I completely agree. And I could really continue talking to you for a very long time. I'm having a very fun time. But I have to ask you my final question.
Uh-huh.
And it's going to be one of those unfair questions that's like kind of expansive and it's just going to be put in your lap. So don't worry, there's no wrong answer. But my sort of outro was sort of how we've been talking about this so far is, you talking about relating to characters through how you can get lost in them as bringing you into the worlds that they're helping to create. I wondered sort of, with what you have ahead or with what you're hoping to have ahead or things that you see that you hope are like, God, I want to get something like that. Like, what are some of the channels or avenues that you're looking forward to like growing through in the work that you take to come? Like talking about like taking bits of characters with you as you go. Like, what are some things that you feel inspired to or excited to like grow through with opportunities you want to have ahead of you?
I think a lot of people thought that when I did Orphan as a 10-year-old, that performance was like a fluke because I was a kid. And I think a lot of people perceive like child actors to be like, paid puppets, which I don't necessarily. I've worked with some where you literally are like, oh my gosh, like without these parents, like, I don't know if this would be as good, or at least acting teacher. But also, I mean, I was so aware of that performance. I really did so much work on it and I was really proud of that performance. And so for years, it's been a really interesting place to be as an actress where I feel like I'm constantly having to prove that was not a fluke. And I feel really excited that this movie has, in my mind, at least shown people that I've worked with, people that I will work with in the future, that I can carry a film from beginning to end. I can be the one that takes you on this ride. I can fully kind of transform into a character that's not a homicidal maniac, and I can really, be trusted with somebody's vision for what story they want to tell. And that is what I really hope I get the opportunity to do, is to really lead more films and tell more stories like this that really make you ask questions or put you in a place where you feel seen and understood, or really allow you to look around at somebody in your life and go, I think I know what this person's going through now after watching this movie.
I think that is, you have just really put the bow right on the top with that. And I was excited to see where this conversation was going to go. And I'm glad that it took us to a point too, where we could talk about how you want to feel more honestly seen as an actor and as a professional. And I'm really glad that we got to go there with that.
It's true. Like we said, nothing's as it seems, I really am like, I remember when I was young, I went to this Elle Women Hollywood party when Orphan came out. And I distinctly remember Kate Hudson, who I've always looked up to, standing up there and accepting an award. And she literally said to this audience of like Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and all these amazing directors and all these amazing actors, she said, I'm currently not working on anything and I would like a job. So if anybody is hiring for a film and wants to come talk to me about it, I'll be sitting at that table. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, really nothing is as you think it is. And everyone's just looking to feel seen by somebody else, always.
I love that. And speaking of like demystifying the work and sort of breaking the fourth wall, that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Isabelle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
This is absolutely one of the best goddamn movies of the year, The Novice.
Thank you.
And I wish for people to rush to any platform or opportunity to see it. You do. And tremendous job. Like you said, every frame of the film, there you are. And all the feelings of being rewarded that you express in doing the work, that communicates through on screen. And as an audience member, I feel as rewarded by your efforts. So thank you for that.
No, thank you, Jordan. And this was such a great conversation. So cool to talk with you about it. Really, thank you.
That was Isabelle Fuhrman, everyone. She is tremendous in The Novice. You can rent that digitally now if you want to watch a harrowing character study of a young woman driven to the brink by the pursuit of perfection, plus rowing, plus an incredible performance. That's all you need. Isabelle is set to star also Set your watches, everybody. I've been making a daisy chain countdown for this. She is set to star in the prequel to The Orphan. She has already filmed that. It's called Orphan First Kill. It's set to come out later this year, COVID depending, who knows about these things. But if you're not familiar with The Orphan, I cannot tell you how bananas insane it is that they're doing a prequel specifically to this movie and that Isabelle has returned to reprise the role. So let's all gear up for that. But before we end today, I said I've got one quick thing before I go, and that concerns my beloved favorite horror franchise of all time, Scream, the 5th installment of which is coming out, I believe, next week. This is years in the making. Scream 4 came out in 2011, I think. And so we are past a decade since the last time we had Scream. And I'm really worried, guys. I'm really worried because the thing about horror, if you know the rules, is that the sequel always has to level up. The body count has to be higher. The spectacle has to be crazier. And like Randy told us about trilogies, like it could be Reservoir Dogs by the time this thing is over. Everybody could die. And as he said, that means you, Sid. But the thing about Scream is that I don't know what Bellinelli and Olpen, the writer-directors of Ready or Not, who have taken on the franchise, I don't know what they have planned, but I'm terrified that Sidney Prescott is going to die in the name of raising the stakes or resurrecting the franchise or passing it off to new stars, and that it cannot happen. It cannot happen because Sidney Prescott is sacrosanct. Sidney Prescott cannot die. The entire point of Scream is that Ghostface is an interchangeable whoever the hell that Sidney Prescott vanquishes every time. And I don't care if you think that keeps the stakes low. I really don't care, because the point of Scream is that Sidney is greater than the nemesis. Sidney is greater than the villain. The villain can die, but Sidney must remain immortal, because that is the soul of the franchise. I feel like if you killed Sidney Prescott, Wes Craven would rise out of his grave and weep over you in your bed in the night. Like, I'm not even going to say he's going to haunt you and kill you. I'm going to say he's going to be disappointed in you, and he's going to find you and imbue you with the sadness and the heartbreak that he would have for his screen heroine that is the greatest final girl of all time, that is the greatest scream queen, the greatest slasher heroine, and I take that designation very seriously. All due respect to Jamie Lee Curtis, she might be the blueprint, but Sidney Prescott is the apex predator. She is the apex predator all day, baby. And so I just hope that, not out of a sense of reverence to a franchise or Easter eggs or like misplaced loyalty to fans who are too precious. This isn't about being precious. This is about the only horror franchise that made the final girl bigger than everything else. That's it. This is about the franchise that made the final girl representative of so much strength and enduring survivability that it didn't fucking matter who was Ghostface, because the main event was Sidney, and the main event will always be Sidney. So I hope going into Scream that we can all come out the other side and celebrate yet another triumph by Sidney Prescott, because if not, this movie can be buried under a jail. Like, even if I loved every minute of it, in that moment, if Sidney Prescott went down with the ship, I would riot, I would scream. It would be, Twitter hashtag screaming, crying, throwing up, terrible moment for me. And I hope all of you, if you truly understand the poignancy of Sidney Prescott as a heroine. So that is all I have to say for now. Hopefully I don't have too terribly much to say in this same matter on a couple weeks, because that will mean things will have gone horribly awry. But that is our show then. That is our very exciting show. You can follow us on Twitter at Feeling Seen Pod, or you can join our Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/feelingseenpod. And you can also send us an email at feelingseen@maximumfun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm JorCrew on Twitter. That's JORCRU. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher. And this is a production of Maximum Fun.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned. Audience supported.